THOUXANBANFAUNI, one of the hardest names to spell in all of hip hop, and also one of the hardest rappers to ever step foot into the underground. I mean, this man has countless classic songs, mixtapes, big name collabs, and professionally shot music videos. And with several of said songs now sitting at over 1 million views apiece, it seems like his come up should have been inevitable, especially since he started making music so early on in the SoundCloud wave. I mean, this man has been doing it as far back as 2010, really hitting his stride in 2015 and getting big name features and collaborators like Space Ghost Perp, Ski Master Slump God, Lil Peep, Lil Tracy, and most importantly, Playboi Carti. And this wasn't a one-off thing either, because him and Playboi Carti were actually pretty close friends, with him and another artist going by the name of Uno the Activist actually forming up a group with Fauni called Splur Gang. And while this group was pretty short-lived, in the time that they were active, they completely redefined the sound of Atlanta hip-hop before then completely taking over the underground scene over there, as well as expanding even farther beyond that. So you would think with all these accolades, THOUXANBANFAUNI would be a lot bigger than he is. And don't get me wrong, he definitely does have a lot of respect in the underground scene, but he never really went as far as many of his contemporaries. But why is that? Why was THOUXANBANFAUNI never able to blow up in the same way that many of his SoundCloud contemporaries did? Is it the type of music that he makes being a little bit too obscure for people to connect to? Is it possibly something that went on behind the scenes with people trying to blackball him? Or maybe his persona just doesn't catch on with the mainstream audience? Well, we'll discuss all those factors and more when we look into the story of THOUXANBANFAUNI. Tajwar Hakeem Lattimore was born October 3rd, 1993 in Chattanooga, Tennessee, as the oldest of his 6 siblings. So right off the bat, we already have a little bit of a contradiction, because in many of Fauni's early interviews, he mentions being the oldest of all of his siblings, but in one DJ Vlad interview, he also mentions having an older brother. Now, I believe the reason that he doesn't group this older brother in with the rest of his siblings is because he was actually quite a bit older than him, and during a lot of the time that Fauni was growing up, he was incarcerated. And because of that, Fauni was really only able to get to know him around the age of 15, which is most likely why he doesn't consider him as part of the main family that he grew up with, because after all, he didn't really know the guy. But having an older brother that you never really got a chance to meet isn't all that big of a deal. The bigger deal is the fact that Fauni's father also got arrested around the time that he was 2 years old. Now, the reason behind this is apparently his father ended up killing a man in self-defense. Now, we don't really have a whole lot of details about this story because Fauni's mother never really liked to talk about it, and because of that, it's never really been talked about online by Fauni himself. All he really has to say about his father is that he got put in a situation where he had to defend himself, but unfortunately, he didn't have enough money to get a lawyer, so the feds gave him that fed time, basically meaning that he got 15 years in prison. And of course, with Fauni only being young, he never really got to know his father during his formative years, and because of that, he would have to look to other male role models to find guidance. But luckily for him, it wasn't long before his mother decided to move the entire family to Atlanta to be closer to his grandparents, and because of this, Fauni would often move around from family member to family member. Sometimes he'd be on the north end of Atlanta, sometimes the south end, east, west, basically all over the place, with him attending several different middle schools, elementary schools, and high schools. And through most of his life, he would spend his time in Atlanta during the school year before then returning to Tennessee to hang out with his cousins, and it was during one of these summers that a life-changing incident would take place. Basically, Fauni and his cousins were hanging out one day and they found a couple steel rods they were playing around with. They're doing acrobatics, sword fighting, and one way or another, one of those steel beams ended up hitting Fauni in the face. This led him to have a pretty gnarly injury on his forehead where his skull was actually cracked and he would have to be rushed to the hospital to get several stitches put in hopes of healing the wound. Now, while this injury wasn't life-changing, it would leave him with a permanent deformity on his forehead where he unfortunately had a dent that remained for the rest of his life until later on when he ended up putting a tattoo over it. So for anybody who thinks that NBA Youngboy is the first rapper to have dents in his head, THOUXANBANFAUNI actually has him beat by quite a few years. But besides that one pretty nasty injury, his childhood really wasn't all that bad, with him having several extended family members that would take care of him, with him sometimes living with his aunt, sometimes living with his grandparents, and sometimes living with his cousins. During this time, Fauni would pick up many hobbies, for example, playing Sega Dreamcast, watching Toonami, which really sparked his love for anime, and most importantly, skateboarding. Now, when Fauni first started off, he really wasn't anything all that special, with several kids that he went to school with actually making fun of him for his lack of skills in skateboarding, but all that did was motivate him even more to try harder and harder, eventually becoming pretty skilled in the sport, which was a pretty helpful skill to have for a kid that was moving around a lot during his formative years, because it meant no matter where he was, he could go to the local skate park and hang out with people. And all this moving would also help to form his taste in music, because after all, when he was in one place, he'd hear a certain type of music, then he'd go to the other side of town and hear something completely completely different. This gave him a love for all different styles of music, with country and rock being two that he would often listen to, but his main love was of course hip-hop, with some of his favorite artists at the time being Outkast, Andre 3000, and most importantly Gucci Mane, because at this point Gucci Mane has basically inspired half of the hip-hop community. But while he definitely enjoyed listening to hip-hop, he didn't want to become a rapper himself until a little bit later on, with the farthest that he would go being freestyles at the lunchroom table, although that was pretty common for the time and really wasn't anything all that notable. By the time that Fonny was 15 years old, he ended up moving in with his grandparents so he could go to a more upper-class high school in the north end of Atlanta, and this is also around the time that his father was finally released from prison. This would finally give Fonny the chance to get to know his father, as well as his older brother, who was released from prison around the same time, although their relationship was pretty short-lived because only a year later, his brother ended up getting set up and unfortunately died in a shooting. Fonny would later describe this moment as not being all that impactful for him because after all, he didn't really know his brother like that, and while he definitely felt bad that he never got the chance to know him better, his death didn't really shake him all that much. But with that said, I feel like now is a good time to mention that it is possible that Fonny joined a gang sometime during his teenage years. When asked about it on No Jumper, he didn't really have anything to say about it besides saying that he was part of a family. But if you know anything about people who are gang affiliated, they don't usually talk about it too much because after all, they don't want to incriminate themselves, and the people who do talk too much usually only put a bigger target on their back. And usually I wouldn't even mention that, but I do feel like it's important to at least note considering some of the actions that Fonny would take later on in his career, but we'll get to that when we get to it. For now, let's talk about his high school days. Around the time that Fonny was 17 years old, he'd become part of a skateboard collective known as Zoo Pack, which included members like Tommy Swisher and Shane Ryder, who were not only skateboarders but rappers as well. And it turns out that Tommy actually had a portable studio that he would often bring over to other people's apartments so they could record music, with Fonny often sitting back and watching the process. And of course, before long, Fonny would want to join in as well, recording his first ever track all the way back in 2010 called Speeding and Smoking, which of course had features from both Tommy Swisher and Shane Ryder. At the time, he was going by the name of Fonny Taj Keem, which is a combination of his real name as well as the nickname that he earned from his friends, Fonny, which comes from the word funny because, well, he was funny at the time. And to be honest with you, that's a pretty terrible rap name, as well as the song that he put out not being all that good, with him even saying that it was a little bit too try-hard and that he doesn't look back on it fondly. But luckily for him and all of us, he would eventually change his name and style, eventually taking on the name THOUXANBANFAUNI. And the story behind this name is that basically one day when Fonny was recording music, he ended up getting a headache and asking his buddy for an Advil. But it turns out that his buddy had recently fallen off his skateboard and broke his arm, leading the doctor to give him a bunch of Oxycontin. So instead of giving Fonny an Advil, he would instead give him a bunch of Xanax and Oxycontin all mixed together in a backpack, and after Fonny ended up taking all of that at once, he overdosed. Now luckily for Fonny, he was rushed to the hospital and the nurses were able to get to him before he ended up passing away. And you would think after a situation like that you'd want to completely stay away from drugs, but it seems like Fonny liked the feeling of getting high so much that he would continue to do them throughout the rest of his teenage years and even into adulthood, with his drug of choice being which he would eventually incorporate into his rap name as well, because his name is actually THOUXANBANFAUNI. I know it's kind of complicated, but if you look closely, Xan is actually in there, which means that he might actually be the first rapper to put Xan in his name, even beating Lil Xan to the punch on that one. Damn man, Fonny had the dents in his head before Young Boy, Xan in his name before Lil Xan. This guy truly is a trailblazer. But yeah, when it comes to the rest of the name, I'm not really sure where he got Thousand Band from. The only thing that I would speculate is that he was a pretty big fan of Space Ghost Perp around the time, so he probably tried to create his name to sound kind of similar to his, but that's only speculation and there's no confirmation of that.
20-year-old THOUXANBANFAUNI, I'm here to tell you about my name. My name, THOUXANBANFAUNI. Not how you say my name. It's not funny. It sounds a lot like funny, but it's not funny. It's funny. 1,000. I got that because my homie had some prescriptions. He was skateboarding, broke his arm, had prescriptions. At his spot, chilling, kicking shit. Went to the studio. Niggas was on some whole other shit, you feel me? I had a headache, so really I wanted to take some motherfucking Advil. This nigga had some in his backpack, but he mixed all his shit with his prescriptions. So I just took a ton of them bitches, like I had a major headache, you feel me? Like some migraine shit, whatever. Don't do that. I lived through it though, through an OD. You feel me? Like, it's crazy. Shouldn't even be here, but I'm here. I'm in this bitch. But they call me 1,000 after that because niggas survived after taking like 1,000 pills, bro. Like on some other shit. Bands, cause I can fuck up some bands. Faunie. But no, Faunie, just because that's how I really take life, like half serious, but really this shit ain't serious.
As the years went on, Faunie would slowly start to move away from that more try-hard type of rap, with him being inspired by people like Tyler the Creator, ASAP Mob, Space Ghost Perp. Unfortunately, we can't really look back at his old music to watch his evolution as an artist, because the only song that he has out pre-2015 is a track that he released all the way back in 2013. This is off a project called Gradient Map, which really only consists of one song called DSKK, which we only know about because he tweeted about it all the way back in 2013, and the song itself, well, yeah, it kinda sucked.
Down to the dirty, say Joe Kage, Sailor Moon, give me meatball head, and I'm motorboat tsunade.
But it wouldn't matter, because soon after that, Faunie would start to meet the people that would eventually shape the rest of his career, with him meeting another aspiring rapper that lived down the street from his aunt, who was known as Jordan at the time, but most people nowadays know him as Playboi Carti. Now, just like THOUXANBANFAUNI, Carti had started rapping all the way back in 2011, but he only just started dropping music on SoundCloud in 2014, and his buzz was basically non-existent. However, he did have a cousin going by the name of Uno the Activist, who had just turned 18 years old and actually had his own apartment, meaning that a lot of people would often go over there to hang out, rap, and, well, do drugs. And with Faunie at this point being a little bit older than both Carti and Uno, he really didn't have a whole lot to lose by going over there and seeing what was going on, because after all, at the time he was working at McDonald's, and that was pretty short-lived as it was, because according to Faunie, apparently all of his coworkers hated him and he ended up getting fired after only a couple months. So there really wasn't anything better to do than head over to Uno's place and see what was going on, and when he got there, he actually ended up getting into a fight with Uno's roommate. Now, you would think that Uno would be upset about this and kick Faunie out, but apparently he also didn't really like this roommate, so the two of them ended up beating him up together, and after that, they formed a lifelong friendship. And with the two of them now hanging out on the daily, turning up, doing drugs, and trying to make a little bit of money, they also wanted to make a little bit of music, and this is really where Splur Gang was born. Now, Uno and Carti already had a couple tracks on SoundCloud at this point, which were gaining quite a bit of attention within the local neighborhood, but in the grander scale of Atlanta, they definitely weren't shit. However, once the three of them all got together and started dropping music as a collective, it wasn't long before they completely took over Atlanta. Now, the first ever track that formally mentions Splur Gang is actually off of Playboi Carti's mixtape going by the name of Face on the track Bag, which talks about how Playboi Carti is actually the CEO of Splur Gang. Now, you probably think that line is pretty egotistical by Playboi Carti, claiming that he's the leader of a collective that only formed up a couple months ago, but it turns out that this track actually came out before Splur Gang was actually an official thing, so at this point, I would say that Playboi Carti hadn't really become all that egotistical yet, but he will later, don't get me wrong. And there's even an earlier mention of Splur Gang on the track Holyfield, where within the outro you can hear Carti shout it out, and this track came out in March of 2014, long before Faunie ever got to meet Uno, so at this point I would say that Splur Gang was really only a concept. Soon after those two tracks came out, Uno the Activist ended up dropping his first track on SoundCloud going by the name of Dat Work, with all three tracks actually being produced by Mexico Dro, which if you remember from my Young Bands video is the producer that Playboi Carti would later fuck over by not paying for his beats. Yeah, that's right, this guy was actually fucking with them all the way back in 2014, and Playboi Carti still ended up screwing him over. And another random fact about Dat Work by Uno was that Curb Goop would actually end up remixing it later on in the year, which is kind of a funny connection. I never thought the two of them would work together, but honestly not that important to the story, so let's get back to it. After Faunie saw how well Carti and Uno were doing on the platform, he was also inspired to start dropping music on SoundCloud, with his first ever track released on there going by the name of Rihanna Wrist. And while this track is definitely a lot slower and more low energy than a lot of Faunie's later work, you can definitely hear him coming into his own and finding the style that would eventually make him popular. That track was then followed up by another one called Fake Fuck With Me, and then after that he would drop his first collaboration track with Uno the Activist going by the name of Parking Lot Pimping. And this track actually ended up becoming the first big breakthrough hit for both Faunie and Uno, with it getting placed on a hot new hip hop playlist, of course getting it a lot of momentum on SoundCloud, as well as eventually even getting it played in the local clubs around Atlanta. Which is kind of funny to think about considering the fact that Uno Uno was only 18 years old at the time, meaning that he couldn't even get into the club that was playing his own music, but either way, they were starting to gain a little bit of traction in Atlanta, and it only made sense to double down and create more music in the same style. And that's exactly what they would do, with Fonny releasing his first ever mixtape on SoundCloud going by the name of Heavy, which unfortunately was deleted later on for unknown reasons. However, luckily for us, he would re-release all of these tracks again in 2018 on his Lost Files mixtape, meaning that we can listen to them and see what they sound like.
Boys on my own, blowing strong, get my fucking zone.
After the release of that project, Fonny and Uno would then go on to release 2 more collaboration tracks going by the name of Lingo as well as Amazing. Neither one of these tracks are all that notable besides the fact that Lingo was actually produced by Icy Schwa, who's a pretty legendary SoundCloud producer, but besides that, they did decent numbers but didn't really push them too much farther. For the time being, Parking Lot Pimping would remain their biggest song, but that wouldn't stop Fonny from dropping even more music, releasing his second ever mixtape on SoundCloud going by the name of Heavier. This mixtape really isn't all that notable besides the fact that it does include a collaboration song between Uno and Fonny that goes by the name of Throwed, and then soon after that, Uno and Fonny would actually end up releasing an entire collaboration mixtape called For Christ's Sakes. This mixtape was mostly comprised of already released tracks that they had up on SoundCloud, but it also included 4 entirely new tracks at the same time, which the fans really seemed to like. And at this point, it seems like Fonny and Uno were getting enough attention on SoundCloud to even get noticed by bigger artists in the scene, including Space Ghost Perp, who Fonny actually ended up getting on a track with by the name of Terror Gang. Sadly, this connection didn't last all that long though, with Fonny describing later on in an interview that Space Ghost Perp tried to put him in the middle of some type of beef and he didn't really fuck with that, so he ended up cutting him off. With him going on to say that this taught him a very valuable lesson, that even people that he looked up to could be goofy once he got to know them in person, which is definitely a very valuable lesson that I feel like a lot of artists need to learn. Just because you fuck with somebody's music and really like their persona doesn't mean that they're actually a good person behind the scenes. You don't really know somebody until you know somebody, and once you do get to know them, you might not really like what you see. By late October of 2015, Fonny would start to get some pretty big opportunities by getting one of his tracks uploaded on Elevator with the song Old Swag, as well as hopping on a track with Swag Hollywood for the song Park My Car. With him ending off the year by appearing on several tracks off of Uno's mixtape Gift of Gab, before then getting a music video on Elevator for their previously released collaboration track Amazing, as well as all 3 members getting together for the first time to hop on a track called Splur Gang, which ended up doing numbers on SoundCloud as well. Now during this period, Playboi Carti definitely was fucking with Splur Gang, but it was a little bit more of an informal thing, with him mostly focusing a lot of his attention on Awful Records and the rapper Father. And this is where Carti gained a lot of his initial buzz by going on tour with them, using their professional studios, and Father even wanted to sign him at one point, but unfortunately, right before he got the chance to, Carti would start hanging out with a guy named Ian Connor and get him with the ASAP Mob. So even before the Splur Gang was really getting off of the ground, it already kind of felt like Uno and Fonny were the 2 members that were really fucking with each other, and Carti would show up from time to time. However, even with Carti leaving Father in the dust, he was still trying to bring Splur Gang along with them, with the very next track that they released going by the name of Elon Thug, which was a collaboration track between Uno and Carti. This track was named after the clothing brand created by the ASAP Mob, with Carti even getting a neck tattoo with the symbol to try to show his loyalty to the brand, and Uno also tweeting out that he was a Elon Thug. With the track even getting posted up on the ASAP Mob SoundCloud page, which of course got it a lot more attention. And it turns out that this track was actually supposed to appear on the ASAP Mob Volume 1 mixtape alongside another collaboration track between Uno and Carti going by the name of What, which actually ended up getting a very professionally done music video on the ASAP channel. Now at this point you start to think, where is Fonny? I mean, after all, he's supposed to be the 3rd member of the Splur Gang, but he's not appearing on any of the tracks that are supposed to be getting the attention of the ASAP Mob. Is there a reason that he's being cut out of the equation? Well, we don't really know for sure because unfortunately there's not really any concrete details to describe what was going on around the time. It's definitely possible that maybe the mob only really wanted Uno and Carti and didn't really want Fonny. However, I think it's a little bit more sinister than that because I feel like it was actually Playboi Carti who was trying to cut Fonny out of the equation. I mean, the 2 of them were definitely on good terms in 2015, with Carti even asking Fonny to do a hit on Young Bands. If you don't know about that situation, basically Young Bands ended up buying a feature from Carti, never paying him back, and then after that, Carti asked Fonny to go do something about it. But despite that going down in late 2015, it is possible that Carti never really respected Fonny as an actual artist and only really saw him as a thug that could do things for him behind the scenes. It's either that or maybe Carti saw Fonny as dead weight. I mean, after all, him and Uno are already making pretty similar types of music, so trying to sell 3 rappers with the exact same style might have been been a hard thing to do. A lot of Uno's fans say that he was actually the one who came up with that style of rap in the first place, and then Carti ended up copying it, and apparently Faunie would then go on to copy the two of them, but either way, Faunie was being cut out, and we don't know why. All we really know is that THOUXANBANFAUNI would later go on to say that Playboi Carti was talking shit behind his back. We don't really know the context of that, but I feel like this could have been the situation behind it. However, despite that, it's not like Playboi Carti wasn't dropping music with Faunie at all, because they actually ended up putting out a collaboration track called Still Kicking, which never got the attention of Elon Thug or what. So I don't know, maybe Carti was trying to throw Faunie a bone at this point, or maybe it got recorded before the other two tracks and then Faunie decided to put it out, but either way, things are definitely getting a little bit sketchy behind the scenes. So at this point, you would think that maybe Faunie would fall into irrelevancy, Uno and Carti would go on to become full-on members of the ASAP mob, but it seems like Playboi Carti wasn't actually comfortable with sharing the spotlight with anyone and would eventually end up fucking over Uno as well. With Carti going behind Uno's back and talking to the mob, saying that they shouldn't try to sign the entire Splur gang and should only sign him as a solo artist. I'm not really sure if they were trying to sign Faunie as well, but either way, Carti didn't want them to sign anybody besides him. And this is what I'm talking about when it comes to snake behavior, but unfortunately, things only get worse from here. Now, as you already know, if you watch my Young Bands video, around this time, Carti would fall out with both Mexico Dro as well as Milan Beats, meaning that Uno, Faunie, and Carti wouldn't use their beats in the near future. But despite that, Faunie kept plugging away, dropping a small EP in late 2016, going by the name of 34. This was basically 5 solo tracks that didn't really get a whole lot of attention, before Faunie then appeared on a feature alongside an artist going by the name of Lambs on the track 10K Freestyle, which got another music video on Elevator. I mean, pretty good things for an underground rapper, but at the same time, if you can be fucking around with the ASAP mob or fucking around with Elevator, I feel like you're gonna pick the ASAP mob every single time. However, Uno and Faunie actually would end up getting a pretty big opportunity in the summer of 2016 when they ended up performing alongside Famous Dex, with Faunie even getting the chance to get on Dex's next mixtape going by the name of Dexter the Robot. And this was during that short period that Famous Dex was even bigger than Lil Uzi Vert, so getting that cosign was definitely a pretty big deal for THOUXANBANFAUNI. And this actually gave him the opportunity to sign a management deal with Quality Control, which if you don't know who they are, they're actually the label that signed both the Migos and Lil Yachty, so they were definitely a pretty big deal within Atlanta. And with this big label behind him, he was finally able to release the track which I consider his breakthrough single, Wish Me the Worst, which ended up releasing with the big budget music video on World Star Hip Hop, which basically gave the mainstream their first real look at THOUXANBANFAUNI. So even though he wasn't getting in close with ASAP mob like Carti and Uno, he was starting to carve his own direction in the rap game, and if he kept going down this path, he would definitely become a mainstream rapper in no time. With 2016 being an incredibly solid year for him, and 2017 looking like an incredibly promising year that would really blow him up and make him into a big deal, but unfortunately before 2017 could even roll around, tragedy would strike. Because unfortunately, Uno the activist, Faunie's biggest collaborator and best friend, actually ended up getting shot. And the reason behind this is because Uno actually ended up getting into a beef with another affiliate of the ASAP mob going by the name of Bloody Dior. Basically what happened is that they got into a bit of a feud over a woman, not really sure the entire details of this, but either way, it seems like Bloody Dior was really not fucking with Uno. So much so that the two of them would actually get into a physical altercation where Dior would actually end up shooting Uno. Luckily this wasn't fatal and he would recover in the following months, but it definitely ended up creating a tear between him and Carti. And why is that, you ask? Well, as soon as everything went down, Faunie would immediately take the side of Uno and rush to his brother's aid, basically calling out Bloody Dior and saying that they were no longer cool, but when it came to Carti, he wouldn't cut off Dior. I mean, after all, Carti was trying to be cool with the mob. He had already gone too far and got too close to them to switch back now for a friend that he had basically already left in the dust. I mean, after all, Carti didn't really want Uno around in the first place. He wanted that solo deal. And now that Uno was taken out of the picture, he was able to get closer and closer to Bloody Dior, even posting up a picture calling him his big bro. Which on one hand I can't understand, because after all, Carti was working on his own career. He had worked too hard to throw it all away over a beef that didn't really involve him. But at the same time, you can definitely understand why Uno was super pissed off. With him tweeting at Carti non-stop, calling him a rat, a snake, a devil worshipper, and basically saying that he was a fake for not taking his side. Carti never really ended up responding to this publicly. He would reach out to Uno and basically say that he was trying to use his name for clout, which of course ended up severing their connection once and for all. Now as the years went on, Uno and Carti would eventually make up, although I do feel like it's kind of one-sided. I mean, Uno was definitely pretty upset for a long time, tweeting about him, dissing him on several songs, but Carti would never respond to this in any way, and by the time that 2020 rolled around and Whole Lotta Red came out, Uno actually ended up reposting the album, which I feel like was the right move, because while Uno definitely is justified in being very upset upset with Carti. When somebody's not responding to you time and time again, it kind of comes across like you're trying to clout chase by dissing them over and over. But either way, for right now in 2016, Uno and Carti were definitely not cool. Their connection was cut once and for all, and Carti would go on to become a massive rapper in the following year. He ended up dropping some of the biggest songs of his entire career, getting collaborations with Lil Uzi Vert, A$AP Rocky, and of course putting out a mixtape which is still very beloved by the entire SoundCloud community even to this day. And he even got on the XXL freshman list back when that used to matter. Meanwhile, Uno and Faunie were still in the underground and would have to keep working if they wanted to get on that similar level. And Faunie would immediately get to work by dropping 2 solo tracks on his personal YouTube channel, going by the name of Who You Testing and Walk, before then dropping a mixtape in early 2017 going by the name of Heavyweight Champion, which was mostly overlooked considering the fact that Faunie would find himself in trouble soon after that. Now this is once again another situation that has a little bit of mystery around it because Faunie doesn't really talk too much about the antics that he gets into, but to make a long story short, he basically tried to get into an A$AP concert and the cops ended up turning him away. This all went down in January 2017 on Yams Day, which is basically a day that's supposed to pay respects to the fallen A$AP member, A$AP Yams. If you don't know about him, he overdosed back in 2015, so at the time it was still pretty fresh, and it seems like Faunie wanted to be there to either perform or maybe he was trying to be part of the crowd. I'm not sure if he was trying to get at Carti, I don't know if Carti was even there, but either way it seems like the venue didn't want him to go in and the cops ended up arresting him and taking him back to the station, where he ended up posting a picture of himself on Twitter in handcuffs. Luckily for him, the charges weren't that bad, although I do think that he might have been on drugs around the time, which definitely led to a bit of a harsher sentence, but either way, he was able to get bailed out and nothing really came of it. And the reason I believe that he was on drugs at the time is because when later asked about it on a No Jumper podcast, he said he doesn't remember the entire situation, so he was probably either blacked out on alcohol or possibly next. But luckily for Faunie, by March of that year, basically everybody had forgotten about the event, with him and Uno then appearing on a Mass Appeal interview where they would talk about their career, come up, and several different topics. Faunie would also then go on to do a solo interview on the channel, which released around the same time, so he was finally starting to get his side of the story out there. However, unfortunately, only a couple of days after that interview ended up coming out, Faunie would once again find himself in conflict after he ended up getting robbed in Atlanta by a rapper going by the name of Slim Cito, or maybe it's Slime Cito, I'm not really sure, but either way, he ended up robbing Faunie, and then he posted up with his stolen chain only a couple days later. And if it wasn't bad enough that he had been robbed and was now being made fun of online, it got even worse when Lil Yachty actually ended up posting up with his chain as well. Lil Yachty did claim that he didn't know that this was Faunie's chain, but either way, Faunie was not happy. And this is when he ended up making a decision that definitely hindered his career quite a bit in the following years, because he actually ended up pulling up on Lil Yachty and at him. Now luckily nobody was hurt in this altercation, and it doesn't even seem like Faunie was really trying to shoot at Lil Yachty. He was only trying to shoot in the general direction to scare him. But even knowing that information doesn't really make it a whole lot better, because after all, Lil Yachty is actually the nephew of somebody who works high up at quality control, so shooting at the nephew of your boss is definitely a dumb idea. And Faunie might have actually ended up getting away with this too, but as soon as he ended up at Yachty, he would immediately call him on the phone and start laughing like a maniac, basically trying to prove a point that he was going to scare him, but Yachty would immediately go to his uncle, and after that, well, Faunie ended up getting dropped. And that wasn't the only altercation that THOUXANBANFAUNI found himself in that year, because he actually ended up shooting at another rapper as well, going by the name of D Savage. Now, I'm not really sure why the two of these guys had beef, because Faunie has never spoken on it before, and Savage has given a couple different stories. 7 years ago, when it actually went down, Savage would do an interview talking about both Faunie and Uno, and how he used to make music with them back in the day, and used to be cool with Carti. But apparently some sort of interpersonal beef must have went down that led THOUXANBANFAUNI to pull up on him and try to shoot him at a show, which once again was a terrible idea because there was a lot of innocent bystanders there, and apparently D Savage actually ended up back as well, so somebody definitely could have got hurt, with many fans going after Faunie on Twitter saying that he was putting people's lives in danger for absolutely no reason. And then later on in 2025, D Savage would once again talk about the situation, saying that he didn't even know who Faunie was. Not to mention that Faunie had also pulled up on Tyler the Creator in the past, asking him where D Savage was and telling him that he didn't want any smoke, so that probably burnt another bridge right there.
Yo, man! Hey, Tyler! Tell D Savage cut that pussy ass shit out! Exactly. Slap the fuck out that bitch ass nigga.
So yeah, long story short, basically Faunie was crashing out all over the place, burning bridges, shooting at artists that he shouldn't have been at, and that led him to get blackballed in Atlanta. And I don't think we're ever really going to know the true story between the beef between D Savage and Faunie unless Faunie decides to talk about it in the near future, which I feel like he won't because nowadays he's not really into all that beefing and shit. But you know what? I might actually end up doing a D Savage video in the future, so if I can find more details about it, I'll definitely let you guys know. But for right now, all you need to know is that THOUXANBANFAUNI was basically blackballed in Atlanta. And I feel like none of this would have ever happened if Faunie had been sober. If you listen to him in interviews around the time, you can definitely tell that he's on something pretty serious, and that led him to crash out in ways that he probably wouldn't have if he had a clear head, and of course, it created a lot of damage to his career. However, to say that everything was over immediately after he at Little Yachty would be kind of disingenuous because he went on to have a pretty successful career throughout the rest of 2017. Because a month after all of that went down, he would immediately get on a track with both Little Tracy and Little Peep on the song called In This Bitch, which was actually recorded right before Little Peep and Little Tracy fell out, so that was definitely good timing. That summer, he would get a feature from Ski Mask the Slump God, who was about to start really blowing up in late 2017 on a track that's named after a phone number. Soon after that, him and Uno would get a music video on Lyrical Lemonade for their track Act Up, which honestly doesn't have that many views on the channel because it wasn't super big until 2018, but either way, definitely still a pretty big break for them. Immediately after that, he would then go on No Jumper for the first time, where he seems to be so high out of his mind that you can barely understand what he's saying, so that wasn't really a good look, but either way, Lyrical Lemonade and No Jumper a couple months apart is definitely good for any rapper's career. He would then attempt to make a pitch to be on the XXL freshman list for that year, which unfortunately he didn't end up making, where Carti actually did. I don't know if he did this because he wanted to get in a room with Carti, or maybe he really thought that he could be a freshman that year, but either way, he never ended up becoming one, which is kind of funny to think about because 2017 was probably 1 year too late for Carti. He was already basically blown up at that point, and 2017 probably would have been the perfect year to have THOUXANBANFAUNI on there, but I mean, it's XXL, they basically only put artists who are already blown up on the list, so you know, it was never going to happen. He would then finally finish off the year of 2017 by dropping a music video for his track Gorgeous on Worldstar Hip Hop, as well as dropping a mixtape called X-Files, which both did pretty well for him. So in a way, 2017 was one of the best and worst years for him because he ended up getting a lot of opportunities as well as big collaborations that would help him out in the future, but at the same time, he also burnt a lot of bridges that he really didn't have to. So by the time that 2018 rolled around, it was basically time for Faunie to either sink or swim. I mean, after all, he'd basically been on the come up for 3 years at this point, so if he was going to be a mainstream rapper, now was the time. And there was no better time than now because after all, 2018 was basically the peak of the SoundCloud wave, so if he could get a couple big collaborations with people like maybe 6ix9ine, which honestly would be weird, but I mean Uno did it, or somebody like Little Skies, he probably could blow up in a big way. Also, I want to mention this here because I don't know where else I'm going to be able to talk about it, but Uno the Activist was actually still fucking with 6ix9ine after all the allegations came out. After 6ix9ine appeared on No Jumper and got aired out by Zilla Kami the following day for all of his paperwork, immediately Trippie Redd and Adam22 would cut him off, but it seems like Uno was still fucking with them for one reason or another. Maybe Uno didn't know about all of that because at the time 6ix9ine wasn't really all that big, or it's possible that 6ix9ine just happened to get in the room with Uno because at the time he was working for Elevator and Uno was one of Elevator's favorite artists, but either way, it's an interesting fact and I would like to know more about it. Anyways, back to Faunie and his entire 2018. It was actually a pretty solid year for him, with him dropping 2 mixtapes, the first one being the previously mentioned Lost Files, which included all the old songs that he had deleted off of SoundCloud. After that, he would then drop another mixtape called Requiem, which was basically a completely solo project. There wasn't any big name features on it, which is a little bit disappointing, but either way, it's still a pretty solid body of work, and I would consider checking it out if you're a fan of Playboi Carti or Uno or Faunie. After that, he would then appear on 2 interviews with both DJ Small Eyes as well as Vlad TV, where they would ask him about the beefs that he had gotten into in the previous year, which is honestly a little bit sad considering it is a trend that's continued into the modern day, with basically every time that Faunie's interviewed by somebody, all they want to talk about is the beef that he got into and not really his music, his craft, or anything to do with him. It's got to get really annoying for 7 years after you're done fucking with somebody for people to ask you over and over again, what was it like to work with Playboi Carti? I mean, it's definitely cool, it's definitely SoundCloud lore, and I want to know more about it as well, but if I put myself in Faunie's shoes, I probably wouldn't want to be talking about that anymore. But by mid-2018, the Carti shadow was definitely getting way too big to overcome. He was growing into a massive artist at this point, and Faunie was still fumbling around in the underground, which is definitely not where he wanted to be at that point. However, none of that would stop Faunie from from dropping music, with him dropping another music video on World Star Hip Hop for his track Wide Awake, which in my opinion is actually one of his better tracks, but despite that, it didn't do as well as the priorly released music videos. After that, he would then drop another collaboration EP with Uno called For Christ's Sakes Number 2, which once again didn't do as good as the first one, but either way it was cool to see the two of them together all this time later. After that, he would then go on tour with Uno, which led right into 2019, where he would then go viral once again for lighting a yard on fire. Well, I guess he wasn't actually the one who lit the yard on fire, it was somebody else, but either way he ended up recording it and a lot of people ended up seeing that clip. Sadly though, that wouldn't be the only fire in 2019, because soon after that, the studio that he recorded music at would actually get lit on fire by a vengeful person who wanted to get his get back on the person who owned the studio. And while Faunie wasn't there at the time that it went down, the entire studio would burn down, destroying a lot of his music, as well as unfortunately killing two of his friends. And this was around the same time that another one of his friends actually ended up getting shot. He wasn't really in the street life or anything like that, he was actually trying to stop two people from fighting, and he ended up getting stuck in the crossfire, unfortunately passing away. So yeah, there was a lot of tragedy going on in Faunie's life around that time, but luckily it seems like it did spark something inside of him to start doing better for himself, because by the time he appeared on No Jumper for the second time, you can definitely tell that he's a lot more sober. He did smoke a little bit of weed on the podcast, but you could definitely tell that he wasn't on anything harder than that, and he was also a lot more coherent, well put together, even showing off a couple new face tattoos, which looked pretty good. And while most of Faunie's interviews I can't even sit through because he's not really coherent, this was one that I actually watched all the way through, and he actually had a lot of insightful stuff to say, so it was very good to see him in a lot better of a mindset. However, unfortunately, all the crashing out that he did in 2017 definitely did cause permanent damage to his career, and he basically ended up spending the rest of 2019 not really doing anything all that notable. I mean, he would continue to drop music, but it really wasn't getting all that much attention besides from people who were already in his fan base at that point, and then he ended up leaving for a European tour in late 2019, which went into 2020. Unfortunately though, as you already know, in March of 2020, he ended up getting his tour canceled because after all, the pandemic ended up breaking out and he was once again trapped in his house alongside basically everybody else in the world. However, it seems like all this time locked inside was actually good for Faunie, because he ended up dropping one of the best projects of his entire career with the album Clairvoyance, which in my opinion is honestly the best album he's ever dropped. This project also included a feature from Lil Yachty on the track Tokyo Drift, which is honestly a pretty good song, but the main headliner of this entire project is without a doubt Ultraviolet. Now I know this song is hyped to hell and back, and it's probably the song that Faunie's asked about the most when it comes to him performing, but honestly it's really that good. I really think it clears basically everything in Carti's entire discography. Honestly, I can't describe what makes this song so good, but I really feel like it's the perfect song when it comes to that Carti, Uno, Faunie style. Just the way that the beat connects to his vocals really makes this hypnotic style that doesn't even sound like it's from this world. I might be glazing at this point, but seriously, if you haven't heard Ultraviolet and you want to get into THOUXANBANFAUNI, please go check it out. It is really an amazing song. And honestly, it's really amazing to see that 5 years after his initial blow up, he's still able to drop really solid music that not only is on par with his priorly released tracks, but is even better. I mean, when it comes to people like Little Skies, Lil Xan, Trippie Redd, I feel like all the music they put out from 2015 to 2018 is basically the best stuff they ever released, and they never really got a whole lot better than that, with the new stuff not really hitting the same, but THOUXANBANFAUNI hits every single time. And because of that, once the pandemic ended off, Faunie was actually in a pretty good place, with a lot of people looking up to him as a pioneer of the SoundCloud wave, with a lot of the new generation really respecting him for everything that he did. And luckily for him, his style never really aged, unlike a lot of the music from SoundCloud, meaning that he's still able to put out stuff in that similar style and still hit the same chord with the new fans as he was with the old fans. And honestly, that's an awesome thing for Faunie, because it means that he's going to be able to continue to make music throughout the rest of his life. He's able to find new fans day to day, and it seems like people really have a lot of respect for him, which is a lot better of a spot to be than somebody like Blockboy JB or YBN Namir. But with that said, that's basically the entire story of Faunie. I mean, after this point, he continues to drop projects every single year. He continues to do shows, which are unfortunately kind of small considering how big of a fan base that I think he should have. He drops music videos, he collaborates with Uno, he does interviews, but unfortunately at this point it really seems like he's stuck in a box. He was never really able to hit that mainstream status during the time that the SoundCloud wave was really at its peak, and now after it's already ended, it's become even harder for him. But his fans are still really holding out hope that he might be able to cross over sometime in the next decade. I mean, after all these people who were never really all that big during the heyday of SoundCloud are now the biggest artists in the world. I mean, people like Suicide Boy and Ghostmane were definitely never as big as people like Lil Pump and XXXTentacion, but after the pandemic, they got a lot bigger. And not to mention, Lucky, somebody who's actually friends with Fauni, was able to get a lot bigger after the pandemic as well. However, to be fair, Lucky has started beefing with a lot of the new age kids, which is something that I don't think Fauni is going to want to do. I mean, after all, he's tried beefing with people in the past and it's never really worked out for him. So if I was him, I definitely wouldn't take that route, and instead I would try to link up with a couple up and comers, not anybody all that small, but somebody who maybe is starting to get a fan base and could break through soon, you know, kind of coach them, mentor them, and maybe they can bring you up as well. And I'm not saying that he has to do that. I mean, after all, he's in a pretty good position. He's able to do a lot of shows. He has a pretty rabid fan base who definitely enjoys everything he puts out. But at the same time, if you look at his recent SoundCloud numbers, they're definitely dropping off a little bit. And I feel like every time I see Fauni in an interview, he seems very discontent with the fact that he never got a whole lot bigger. I feel like Uno never really wanted to be huge like that, and he actively chose to not be a big time rapper like Carti, where it seems like Fauni really wanted that but wasn't able to reach it, which is honestly kind of sad. But at the same time, I don't think that Fauni should feel bad about the place that he is in the rap game. I mean, after all, like I said, he has a lot of respect, he has a lot of fans, he's probably making full-time music off of rap, which is more than most of those old rappers are able to say at this point. I mean, it could be a lot worse, Fauni. You could be like Lil Wop right now. I mean, nobody wants to end up like that guy. Sorry, Wop. I actually genuinely feel bad for you. But with all that said, I now have to answer the question of why I think that Fauni never was able to make it to that next level. Do I think it's because he ended up shooting at a couple people? Well, no. I think there's more to the story than that. While that definitely hurt him in the short term, I don't think it would have actually caused long-term damage to his career if he had to continue to make music and maybe found another label to work with in a different side of the country. So if it's not for the violence, maybe I blame it on the drugs, but at the same time, I feel like the drugs were kind of a double-edged sword when it came to Fauni, because for a lot of rappers, they ended up blowing up with a certain style that wasn't really all that drugged out, and then they ended up getting heavily on drugs, which meant they couldn't make good music anymore. But for Fauni, he was basically on drugs from the very start, and a lot of his fans really want that drugged out sound from him. But at the same time, it's definitely never a good idea to be high all the time. It hurts your creativity, it hurts your work output, so that definitely could have caused a little bit of damage to his career. But I think there is one factor that really led him to where he is right now, and I think it all comes down to the fact that he never really played the game the way that he was supposed to. I mean, you can shit on Playboi Carti for a lot of things, fucking over everybody around him, stepping over people to further his own career, but at the same time, that's basically the music industry. I'm not justifying any of Carti's actions, but unfortunately, basically every artist who's made it big in the game has had to do something like that, fuck somebody over, work behind somebody's back, talk behind somebody's back. It's basically how the entire industry is run. And I think Fauni was just too real for that. He really said what he meant, and he really meant what he said, and he didn't want to do all the behind the scenes bitching and working with people that he didn't like. If he didn't like you, he didn't want to be around you, and if he did, he wanted to stick down with you. And that's why he ended up taking Uno's side when he could have taken Carti's. At the same time, I'm not really sure if Carti would have taken him along with him with the whole ASAP Mob, but you never know. Carti might have done it to get back at Uno, but would that have been the right choice? Probably not. At the end of the day, even though Fauni ended up never becoming as big of a rapper as Carti, I feel like he can sleep a lot better at night considering the fact that he never really played things the way that Carti did. He didn't fuck over people that did nothing but help him out, and because of that, Fauni can be sure that he actually has real people around him, where Carti probably has a lot of users and abusers in his circle. But that's not for me to say, I'm just speculating. At the end of the day, the guy who made the morally good choice ended up getting fucked over, and the guy who made the bad choice ended up getting farther along. I guess that's life. I'm not really sure what that says about the state of the world, but either way, that's the story, that's Fauni, and honestly, I'm a big fan. Unlike a lot of artists that I cover, which I really don't care for all that much because they either do bad actions, they scam fans, or don't really make all that good of music, Fauni seems like a pretty solid guy. I don't really hear any stories of him scamming people, fucking people over, and every time that somebody performs alongside him, they have good things to say. So with all that said, shout out to Fauni. Hopefully someday he can get a Nardwuar interview. I think that'd be super cool. I mean, Lucky already got one, so I think Fauni should definitely get one. But either way, with all that said, that's the story. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope I didn't ramble too much. I hope you guys enjoyed these longer videos, and if you do and you stay to the end, definitely leave a knife emoji in the comments below, as well as subscribing to the channel because I'm trying to get to 30K before the end of the year. I think we can definitely reach that, and honestly, maybe I should start saying this at the start of the video so more people can stick around. I honestly don't even know if people wait to the end of the video, but if you did, I guess leave like a squid emoji or something in the comments below. Confuse everybody who doesn't stick around to the end, and if you did, I love you, baby. All right, peace out. See you in the next one. Bye.